to all of the things that Tristan mentioned about who I am and what I do. I've also been serving in various capacities as a reviewer for USGBC and GBCI since this rating system was launched in 2005. So I've seen a lot go down as it's gained popularity and as it's evolved. And particularly as more and more new project teams are taking it and trying to implement it into their buildings, we see some definite patterns in terms of where people trip up and want to put out the word on how to avoid those pesky situations. So this is by no means an exhaustive list of all of the sort of things you should be paying attention to on your project, but hopefully it's a good starting point for you all and will set you on a path towards a successful certification. We, because of the CA credits, of course, have some very specific learning objectives for you. And these are here for your reference. Basically, just to summarize them, we're hoping that at the end of this program, you'll have an understanding and be able to describe the first steps that a project team should take when they're considering EBOM, understand the official kind of steps and sort of timeline for the certification process in terms of what you have to do to engage in the program and all of the registration and so on. Here's a big one, manage the performance period aspect of EBOM certification, and finally identify some of the key strategies you'll need to get through the process successfully, including for those of you in multiple tenant situations, which the vast majority of EBOM projects are commercial office buildings, and the vast majority of those have many, many tenants, which throws a particular wrinkle into how you manage your certification process. So, speaking of that process, here it is. For those of you who are familiar with some of the other LEED rating systems, say the new construction program, as you start to get into EBOM, you're going to recognize that it's a bit of a different process. It's not quite the same in terms of the strategy or the team members, all of those aspects. It's really its kind of own thing within the LEED family, and we are going to just kind of walk you through what that is. Some of this will maybe look familiar. As with any LEED rating system, you want to have some kind of idea of what you want to pursue in terms of points, so you're going to be identifying those points and how you're going to approach them and so on. On average, teams would take, maybe about 3 months to get their strategy in order. Usually that's going to start with some kind of gap assessment where they see, where they're already falling against the LEED criteria. Many buildings will already be in a position, just based on their current scenarios, to earn, some number of points. Really super buildings, might be very close to already achieving certification and have to make only minor changes to meet the LEED criteria. For other buildings, it's a different story, and they really have to, make lots of upgrades, operational practices, and so on. So the implementation phase, which kind of comes next, it really sort of flows from your initial assessment, and the length of that phase is really going to depend. It varies widely. I'd say in general it's going to be at least a 3-month period where you're running around getting all the pieces in order. If you have major upgrades that are necessary, it could last for much longer. It could be something that you kind of slowly tackle month by month for the better part of a year. Once you've gone through the process of getting everything in place to comply with the LEED criteria, you have to enter what's called the performance period. This is a pretty key aspect of the EBOM certification process. This is really where kind of the rubber meets the road in terms of your compliance with the criteria and your ability to earn points. There's various rules around the performance period in terms of its duration and its timing. For most credits, it has to be at least 3 months in duration. There's one exception, though. For energy performance, which of course varies quite a bit seasonally, it has to be a full year long. And we'll get into a little bit more of performance period, but that's definitely a key aspect of the whole process. At the end of the performance period, you have to be on the ball and submit your to GBCI, the Green Building Certification Institute, within 60 days of when your performance period concluded. So you can't sort of just take your time there. There's a definite time stamp. Then you'll enter the review phase. There are 2 rounds of reviews, a preliminary and a final round. All of the credits are reviewed at once. During the preliminary review, you'll get feedback on the different credits you pursued, hopefully saying, thumbs up, you did everything right and you've got a point. Sometimes saying, whoa, you were totally, off base and you're not going to get a point. And then more commonly, a credit might be marked pending, and the reviewers will ask you for further information that elaborates on your strategy or clarifies aspects of your approach that maybe weren't fully articulated the first go-round. You get a chance to respond to all of those pending credits and basically kind of craft your rebuttal through LEED Online, and then there's a final round of review. At that point, with any luck, you are all happy and rosy over your new certification. There is a chance to appeal credits that have been denied if you really feel as though you deserve them and they didn't have all the key information in making their decision. So that's the process. I'd say on average, from start to finish, you can expect it to take, between, I'd say the most common time frame is maybe 1.5 years to get through the whole process. It can vary quite a bit, though. If you are already doing lots of green stuff and it's more a documentation exercise, that's going to go quite a bit more quickly than if you have to make major changes to your building. So 1.5 years is kind of a good rule of thumb, but know that it really depends on your situation. At the end, you will probably want to throw some kind of wild bash. You, of course, will get a plaque from the USGBC that you can jam up on your building, and also certificates for the various team members. Don't forget that part. Okay, so from here on out, we're going to focus on a series of strategies that we think are, particularly important for newcomers to the EBOM program to get a handle on early, to really make this go as smoothly for you as possible, particularly if you don't have experience or other projects under your belt. And the first one is really getting your head around the idea of the performance period. There are particular rules, as I mentioned, that you want to be aware of. The reference guide maps them out extensively, so that's your sort of key resource for getting to know them intimately. Once you kind of have a handle on them, you'll start to see ways in which your timing of your performance period is going to be important in terms of the number of points you earn. An example of that is, maybe you only handle your electronic waste once per 6 months. Well, you're going to want to make sure, if you're pursuing the materials and resources credit related to e-waste, that your performance period for that credit is encapsulating the time in which there was good action in your building. And then the last point on here, you really need to be on the ball in terms of submitting your application. There's that 60-day timestamp between when the performance period ends and when you're going to need to submit your application. If you don't do that, you could run into trouble with having to redo certain aspects of your application or redo some portion of your performance period, which is no fun. So a little more on this. It's the period during which you're really collecting all of the data that's going to get rolled into your EBOM certification application. Examples of the type of info you'll be looking to collect are, of course, utility bills, information about recycling rates, and then also kind of more one-time testing things like assessing your outdoor air rates. You have to do that once during your performance period. And then, of course, there's a lot of policies and plans that are a part of the EBOM program. You'll have to show that during the performance period you are executing all of those policies and plans. Again, it's a minimum of 3 months for most credits and prerequisites, with that one exception of the energy benchmarking performance. And it's also a maximum, it has a maximum cap of 2 years for a first-time application. So if you had kind of amazing recycling rates in 1995, it's not going to do you any good. LEED is looking for fairly recent information about your building operations. Next point is that it has to be pretty consistent across all prerequisites and credits in terms of its end date. All of them have to end within a shared 30-day window. So what this means for you is that you can't let certain components of your sustainability program lag while you undertake new components. You have to kind of prop them up and keep them going successfully over time. And again, file that application within 60 days. We've seen a few cases on the review side where teams kind of overlook that 60-day requirement and sent in their application, say, a year after their performance period. Unfortunately, in those cases, it gets kicked right back to them, and they have to do a lot of work in terms of updating it to a more recent time period. Here's an example of performance period. You can see here that there are different start dates for these various credits. Some of them are in 2007, some of them are in 2008. That's okay. The start dates can be all over the ship. However, you do note that the end dates are all pretty consistent. They're all falling within April of the same year. And you'll also see that the duration is always between 3 months and 2 years. You'll note that there's been a little kind of correction I've made in here. Previously, the rule was that the performance periods had to end within a 7-day interval. That was understood eventually to be too draconian in nature of a requirement, and so it's been expanded to 30 days. So some of you may have older versions of the reference guide that still have that 7-day kind of note in there, and you can go ahead and cross that out and write in 30 days. That is the current rule. Here are the consequences, which are, you know, I guess in the grand scheme of things, they're not so dire, but if you've been really working hard on your project, you don't want to have points come back denied because you didn't follow the rules of the performance period. So some of the things that we see is, you know, you just won't get points that you really deserve if you had kind of managed that better. Or you might have a lot of points marked pending after the preliminary review because of performance period timing issues. You know, nobody wants to get their application back with most things marked pending. It's a bit demoralizing, so something to avoid. Or like the example I mentioned, your whole application could be sent back to you for updates. So don't do those things. You'll be happier if you follow all the rules. Next tip here is to make sure you've got access to the right information as you embark on your project. The reference guide is, of course, the sort of key resource as you try to get through a project. It really elaborates on what you're supposed to be doing, what is expected of you, and so on. Those are purchased from the USGBC. Also register your project. This is useful for a variety of reasons. It's really a way to kind of lock in a version of the rating system. You know, these things, these rating systems get revised and re-released, and you don't want the credits changing on you midway through your process. So by registering, you lock in whatever rules and criteria are in effect at that time, and it also gives you access to various tools that you're going to need. Next up, get familiar with the forms for the credits that you're pursuing. We always recommend to our teams that don't wait. There's a temptation, I think, to wait until near the end of the project when you actually have to start really pulling together the application to start digging into the submittal forms. These are the items within LEED Online where you supply lots of information about your strategy and results. They also kind of indicate to you what documents beyond the inputs into the form that you're going to need to provide. If you wait until the end, you might belatedly come to realize that there is a piece of information that you needed to collect that you did not collect. Then you'll be scrambling and backtracking and trying to retroactively capture that information. So definitely right after the gap analysis, when you've decided to go ahead with the project, get registered, get your project team looking at those forms so that there aren't any nasty surprises. This is, some of you are probably familiar with LEED Online. This is sort of the portal for accessing your project on the internet once you've registered. It's also, once you get in there, it lets you determine kind of which credits you're going to pursue and see the forms associated with those credits. There's a bit of a new wrinkle in 2009 in that different parts of the forms kind of appear and disappear as you click through them. Unfortunately, I can't really show you an example of that in this venue, but what it means is that if you accidentally select, option 1 when you meant to select option 2, there'll be a whole hidden suite of option 2 related requirements that aren't going to be apparent to you. So you have to really be careful to accurately sort of indicate which paths you're choosing to compliance, and then click all the way through, because different requirements are going to be popping up out of nowhere as you proceed to click through the form. So be aware of that. The older 2008 forms were called submittal templates. They were a little different. It was a little easier to see precisely what you needed at a glance. You're going to have to hunt and peck a little bit more with the 2009 forms. Okay, next tip, energy benchmarking is really a sort of make or break activity for most projects. A lot of times when teams are going through their gap analysis, they're not sure kind of how many points they can get for a reasonable amount of sort of effort and money. And so they're trying to answer those kinds of questions through the gap analysis. What should our strategy be, and what are the cost and resource implications? There are a few prerequisites, of course, being the mandatory components of the rating system that each and every project must comply with. There's a couple of these prerequisites that really prove to be a hurdle that keeps certain buildings out. The program as a whole, of course, wants to reward just kind of, the greenest of the building. So by design, not everyone is going to be eligible. And this prerequisite related to energy performance, it's called EA Prerequisite 2, is really kind of the gatekeeper for keeping some projects out. And for that reason, you want to have a handle on your energy performance from the get-go. There are a couple different energy benchmarking paths, which we'll talk about. You want to make sure that you know which one applies to you and that you understand all of sort of the nuances of performing benchmarking according to that path. You want to keep your numbers up to date. Basically, you have to input energy data for all sources on a monthly basis, and your score will change from month to month as a result. So you want to really be actively keeping that up to date as you go through the performance period. You also want to make sure you don't make any kind of errors in your inputs. It would be very unfortunate to learn at the end of the day that you had a typo or something, and your score, for energy benchmarking dropped precipitously as a result. And you also want to do this early because you want to understand what kind of improvements you're going to be looking at to become eligible. Many projects will start out the process and not have sufficient levels of energy performance, and they'll go through and do energy audits, do commissioning to learn what the opportunities are for their building to improve performance, what the costs, what the return on investment is going to look like for them. The sooner you know that, the sooner you are able to kind of make a decision about your situation and start implementing those changes. The two different paths to energy benchmarking, called Case 1 and Case 2 in 2009. There are different names for the other versions of the rating system, but they remain pretty similar. The first one that's going to cover the majority of the buildings is Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So everybody knows about kind of Energy Star for your refrigerator. There's also a program for labeling buildings that have achieved kind of superior energy performance. This is a tool that's developed by the EPA. It's online. It's free to everyone. You just have to sign up for a username, and then you can start benchmarking your buildings immediately. The types of spaces that qualify for an Energy Star rating, I've mapped out a few of them here. Office buildings being the big one, other kinds of properties as well, like K-12 schools, warehouses, hospitals, etc. To get a complete list, you can go to the link at the bottom of the page. Any building that's actually eligible for an Energy Star rating has to do their LEED benchmarking through that program. There are, however, some facility types that are not eligible. They are just have loads that are too variable, or there's some reason why EPA hasn't been able to kind of include them in their benchmarking program. Examples include manufacturing, lab, we see a bit, multifamily, and malls. These people have a different row to hoe in terms of their LEED benchmarking. And that is use of a special kind of calculator that's been put together by USGBC. In either case, you're looking at similar data collection in that you have to have utility data for a 12-month period for all energy sources. In Energy Star, you'd also be asked to provide different information about your building, like the area, the space classification, the number of occupants, the number of computers even. Basically, Energy Star has created some kind of algorithm that correlates certain attributes to energy performance, and the ones that have been shown to be significant are included in their benchmarking model. At the end of that process, when you've provided all the inputs, you'll get a score of 1 to 100, and your score kind of indicates the percentile of U.S. buildings of a similar kind of type that you're doing better than. So LEED requires a score of at least 69, which would mean you're in the 69th percentile of all buildings. You're doing better than the majority out there. The Case 2 calculator similarly is going to ask for kind of energy data. However, the way that it operates is a little bit different. This is a screenshot of it. This is one of those things that you can get once you've registered your project from the Registered Projects Tools page, which is a portion of the USGBC's website. I think you can also kind of pull it out of LEED Online once you have a registered project. And it kind of walks you through a different sort of benchmarking exercise. At the end of the day, it tries to compare you to weather normalized source data on a kBTU per square foot basis. We won't go into all of the details, but we do see sometimes teams that were supposed to be using Energy Star try to use this case 2 calculator, or vice versa, and that's definitely not going to fly. You have to be clear about which benchmarking path you're required to follow and then submit accordingly. Here's a few tips in terms of those input errors that you want to avoid. The kinds of things we see commonly are square footage and occupancy changing mysteriously. The reviewers are really going to be looking to make sure that the information you're providing in your energy benchmarking is consistent with what's going on elsewhere in your LEED application. So if your building has grown by 50,000 square feet and that sort of thing within the benchmarking, it'll be noticed and kicked back to you. You also have to kind of make sure you're dialed on the space classifications, and it's recommended to once you've input the data, you can export it and then do a quick graph and make sure there's nothing crazy. In this example here, there was clearly a typo that was sort of increasing the consumption for 1 month by an order of magnitude. That was just a typo. Really quick to uncover it and fix it, and the score looked a lot better afterwards. So that's energy benchmarking. It's one of the more technically complex aspects of your LEED process, so you really have to be detail-oriented as you go through it. So all of that is just about kind of figuring out where you lie in terms of your energy performance. And in many cases, a building will go through that exercise and find out, oh, we have to improve our performance by 10% or our score by 5 points or whatever. There's different, all manner of kind of upgrade opportunities. If you have a score that needs to be increased, doing the energy audits, which are also a part of the LEED rating system, is a great way to uncover what those strategies should be. Here's just a little case study from one of YRG's projects. This was a project building that was about 500,000 square feet, so pretty big. And they had, like a lot of buildings constructed sort of in the mid-century, mid to late century, they had a lot of T12 still throughout their building. So they investigated what it would take to change those out to T8, kind of a newer, better technology. And what they found was this, kind of when you added up all of the materials and labor costs, recycling the existing lamps, which of course you want to do, it was a capital project of over $300,000. They were able to get a utility rebate, though. That's fairly common on the lighting side of things and worth looking into what incentives might exist in your area. And that knocked the cost down a fair amount by almost $100,000. And at the end of the day, their return on investment is just under 3 years because they're going to be saving almost $80,000 a year in energy, and this is kind of remarkable, I think, labor and material savings. These new lamps are much longer lasting, so they don't have to buy new ones as frequently, and they don't have to pay someone to run around and change them out as much. So that's the kind of cost analysis you want to do to figure out which strategies are appropriate for your building. If you're an older building, especially, lighting is probably going to be a relatively good place to start looking in the event that you need upgrades. This is kind of a synopsis of what happened to their consumption after they performed that lighting retrofit. You can see there's right around November of 2007, there's a clear drop in their average daily consumption. That was when the lighting retrofit happened. And subsequent to that, every month or so, their ENERGY STAR score would bump up a point. So it was really, really an advantage to them to do that lighting retrofit. So that's kind of the rundown of energy. I really want to emphasize its importance in terms of getting it right, understanding what the LEED criteria are, because it can be a sort of deal breaker situation within the rating system. Lots of other credits are sort of more forgiving of misunderstandings on the part of the project team or so on, but the energy benchmarking is really an area you want to have dialed. There are some other common problem areas that we sort of see patterns around. I've listed out a few of them here. The first one is wherever there's more complicated calculations involved, there is opportunity for overlooking or misstepping what exactly is required. Examples of that within the rating system include WEP1. This is a prerequisite related to water fixture efficiency. There's a credit associated with it as well. MR credit 4, this has to do with mercury and lighting. This credit uses the LEED invented metric of picogram per lumen hour, which sounds a little bit daunting. And it is require, lots of access to data and inputs, and so there's room for trouble there. And then the last one where we see a lot of trouble is EQ prerequisite 1. This is the prerequisite that deals with determining the required level of outdoor air to your building per ASHRAE 62.1. Those are areas where I'd encourage you to really sort of either seek out somebody who is experienced with performing those calculations, or especially EQP1, spend a lot of time with the reference guide, really sort of understand that it's really detail-oriented work for those credits. Another common problem area, IPM, this stands for Integrated Pest Management, which shows up in a couple of different credits. And teams pretty commonly sort of misunderstand what the requirements are, what it takes to earn this credit, what is and isn't a toxic pesticide, and what to do if you're going to use one. So really sort of sit down with the reference guide and cozy up to these credits to understand what's involved. A lot of times you rely on your vendors to help you with credits like this, and you can't just blindly trust that they're totally dialed with the LEED criteria. Maybe they are, hopefully they are, but a lot of times they just want your business and are going to, nod their head when you say, can you do LEED pest management? It's up to you to kind of vet them and make sure they really understand what's what in terms of the criteria. Then the last kind of common problem area, there are various surveys and audits that are done for different credits, and they're not necessarily super expensive credits to pursue, but they're logistically intense and involve kind of pestering your occupants for information. Pestering is maybe a strong word. Soliciting in a friendly manner information from your occupants. And no one wants to have to kind of go through all of that effort and find out that there was some aspect of the protocol that they didn't follow. So we see pretty commonly where somebody went through, went through the trouble of asking all the occupants in the building how they came to and from work for SS Credit 4, but missed out on some key aspect of the survey protocol and had to redo the whole thing. Really, that's a lot of extra work if you have to redo those things. You're allowed to generally, but you still want to avoid it. So get familiar with the protocols as mapped out in the reference guide for those. Some tips for how to deal with some of these things. The calculations, choose people who are savvy about that kind of work for those credits. and make sure you're really paying attention to the reference guide and the forms. Usually all the right information is there to tell you how to do it, but it might not be where you're expecting to find it, or it might not be all in one place. So you have to get really invest in the reference guide to understand the rules. Also, there's a big temptation out there to perform really complicated calculations in a calculator that you made yourself, as opposed to using the ones within the LEED submittal forms. That's no good because then there's a burden on the reviewer to try to figure out what the heck the project team is doing, if they perform the calculations correctly. Some people go the extra mile and PDF it so that there's absolutely no way to kind of at a glance get at the underlying formulas. So that's to be avoided. There are tools that you want to help build to do different tracking activities, and I know there are a number of them on LEED User, but when it comes time to submit calculations especially, you really need to be transferring that information into the LEED submittal form. A little more on IPM. This is that pest management thing. There's a really specific definition for what LEED considers a least toxic pesticide. It's based on San Francisco's reduced risk pesticide list, Tier 3. They've kind of gone through and tiered out different pesticides, and it's only Tier 3 that counts as least toxic. You're allowed to use other kinds of pesticides besides those on the list, but you need to do what's called universal notification in those cases. That's warning your occupants before, in most cases, you spray them with pesticides, what you're doing so that they can take cover. So understand those criteria when you need to do that. And then again, the vendors may or may not kind of totally get what's what with the criteria. So double check their claims. In terms of the audit and survey missteps, a little laundry list for you here. For SS Credit 4, the alt transit, you want to make sure you're following the methodology and you're dealing with carpoolers appropriately. There's kind of a quirky rule around those. MR Credit 6, this is a credit related to a waste audit. This means picking through your garbage. There's no way around physically sorting through all of the waste that's produced, as unsavvy as that might sound. And not just a little sampling of the waste, but all of the waste that your building has generated during the audit collection period. Lots of times people either won't sort it really, or they will, collect 300 bags of garbage and pick through one of them. That's not going to fly. EQ Credit 2.1, this is about an occupant comfort survey. You're asking people if they're happy or not happy. If they say they're unhappy to a large degree, over 20% of the people, you're actually expected to take action. Teams sort of overlook that one. And then the final one on this list, EQ 3.2, this is the APA audit for cleanliness. Teams will kind of audit the wrong number of rooms or not know that they have to hit a certain percentage based on both the floor area and the number of rooms. So just some things to be aware of as you dig more into your projects. Okay, next tip here. Vendor selection and management. A lot of LEED projects are going to be using either consultants or vendors who are going to help them satisfy some of the LEED criteria. There's a learning curve to all of this. It's not rocket science, but there are a lot of details and bits and pieces. So you want to make sure you're not financing someone else's learning curve. You also want to not hand things off wholly, because that can come back to burn you. You really need somebody who will be policing the different vendors especially. And also, there's a limit to which kind of LEED in the design and construction world experience translates over to EBOM. It really is a different animal. So if you're looking for somebody to join your team, ideally they'll have experience in this specific rating system because they're quite a bit different. compared to the others. In terms of working with your vendors, having it be a contractual obligation for them to meet the LEED criteria is always a good idea. And you also need to be fluent enough in the criteria so that you can play the bad cop. So don't just sort of let them run with things. It's still contingent upon you at the end of the day to make sure they're doing all the right stuff. On the other carrot side of the equation, a lot of vendors see this as an opportunity to learn about the rating system so that they can then market it to other LEED customers. And they also sort of like extending contracts or early renewals, so that could be a part of it as well. Next up, there's a lot of writing involved in EBOM. Unlike the other LEED credits, there's many policies, plans, written kind of information that's mapping out in detail what you're doing in your project building. There are resources out there to kind of help you understand what kind of content is supposed to be included in these documents. The Registered Projects Tools page is, again, a good resource where for policies or plan credits, it's going to tell you exactly what kind of topic areas you have to cover in terms of the scope and the responsible parties and so on. There's a little bit of confusion oftentimes between how policies work versus programs and plans. Policies are associated with prerequisites. These are really higher level kind of strategic statements. The program plan is where the detail lies. This is the document you want to hand over to your new, kind of operations staff when the other folks have, won the lottery and jetted off to Aruba. This is where the detail sits in the program or the plan document. What we see a lot of times from reviews is there's, just not enough detail written out to really feel comfortable that the green strategies are actually being implemented in the building. So if you're providing really sketchy details, it's going to look suspicious. A classic example is around the responsible party. Ideally, this is somebody you could actually go up to in a building and ask for. And if you just list that person as the team or the responsible party or some personnel, they're not really locatable. It should be a title or, even better yet, an individual and a title. There's also lots of narratives throughout the forms that you're asked to fill out, and this is, again, supposed to be about real operational detail that gives the reviewer confidence that you understand the requirements and actually have a plan for executing them. Some teams will take this as an opportunity to just provide a sales pitch about how wonderful they are and how they're helping the environment. Well, that's nice, but it's not really going to help me understand whether or not you're checking your faucets for leaks. Other teams really like to be stingy with the words, and will just kind of, in the shortest way possible, try to get something down. That's not what we're looking for either. The scenario we want is adequate detail to show there's actually a strategy in place. So think back to your third grade book reports of the who, what, where, when, why, and how. You don't really have to cover the why, but everything else should probably be mentioned in your narratives, in your operating procedures, and so on. Okay, penultimate tip here, establishing tracking systems. Lots of LEED credits require some unusual data points that aren't standard to track. Examples would be purchasing data, waste hauler data, those pest management logs, so you're not messing up on your IPM. You really want to get those up and running early and make it clear who has to be in charge of collecting which data. It's much more difficult to sort of go back retroactively and try to gather that information. So it's good to have these tracking systems in place. And then lastly, if you're a multi-tenant office building, which a lot of you probably are, your tenants really have a big role to play in this, potentially. The EBOM program is about whole building certification, so you can't, for the most part, ignore your tenants as though they aren't a part of your reality. There are a few kind of rules that let you sort of proceed with your certification even if they aren't going to participate, but you're going to be hamstrung without their cooperation. So it's a good idea to try to get them on board to the extent that makes sense. There's lots of things, informational pieces and other things you'll be asking of them as part of the process, and you certainly want to be mindful of that and appreciative of their cooperation. But don't be too ready to assume that they're not interested in participating. You know, a lot of tenants have their own sustainability stories that they're trying to tell, and you might be able to facilitate that as part of the LEED process. Some credits are more tenant intensive than others, and so as you're kind of crafting your strategy, you'll want to pay attention to that and be realistic about what it's going to mean to embark upon the ones that require a lot of tenant cooperation. And then also don't be sort of sneaky or non-communicative. You know, everybody likes to be in the know. So it's recommended, I think, to communicate what your intents are from the outset and, you know, give regular updates as you go. They can really help you meet your goals if you invite them to participate. Okay, so those were all of the tips. Here's a recap of our learning objectives, which hopefully you have in fact learned. And we'll be doing Q&A for a spell as well.
Thank you very much, Jenny. This is Tristan Roberts again. And Jenny, we've got a few questions for you from the audience.
Okay.
First off, for forms that require a large quantity of single-line entries such as MRC5, sustainable purchasing, and food, you know, which may require over 10,000 items tracked over 3 months, is there any allowable shortcut?
There are situations where, you know, I mentioned don't use homemade calculators. There are situations where the forms just, you know, can't realistically accommodate all of those line items. So what teams will do in that case is it's all right to bundle certain purchases. Like let's say you bought 2,000 loaves of Wonder Bread over the performance period for some reason. You could kind of group them all together in one line item. So that would be one strategy instead of listing them out individually. The other thing that we sometimes see is teams will have a tracking sheet where they do have itemization, and then they will transparently in Excel, so that all of the summing can be quickly verified. They'll provide that as a supporting document, and then just input into the form some kind of summary information from those tallies. That's generally okay too. It's also more acceptable to do that when the calculations are straightforward, adding, subtracting, dividing. If you're kind of looking at your outdoor air rates though, and there's all of these different corrective factors and coefficients and blah, 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 we don't want people trying to work out that math on their own, or, you know, it's not easy for reviewers trying to verify that. So on the food purchasing or purchasing, there's more tolerance for those kinds of shortcuts.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. Another question for you. How are upcoming changes to Energy Star likely to affect scores for EAP2 and EAC1?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Energy Star is launching this month, I think it is, some changes to their benchmarking. And there is the potential that it could affect your score. And that sort of, they sort of update their benchmarking program on some sort of cycle. I'm not totally dialed on what it is. But we saw that sort of last year with the hospitality world. They kind of redid the algorithm for rating those properties, and a lot of folks saw their scores actually go down quite a bit. So you do want to be aware of when Energy Star is intending to roll out roll out their upgrades and kind of keep a careful eye on how it's influencing your score, because it may have some impact depending on various sort of scenarios. Another thing to note is that there's a streamlined documentation path related to that prerequisite and credit, where if you have an official label from Energy Star, that's a score of 75 or over, and you've gone through all of the verification and PE sort of stamping associated with getting an official label, you can use that for up to 1 year from its issuance. So if you have a score of 80 right now, if you quick applied for the label and got the label, that would be good for up to a year for LEED purposes, even if your score went down because they changed the algorithm at a later date. You'd still get to use that score associated with your label.
For the Energy Star Portfolio Manager, Jenny, what is the best or most accurate way to select your baseline year?
Sure. There is a sort of opportunity within Energy Star to set a baseline year. That doesn't actually factor into the LEED kind of benchmarking process. That's for your own. A lot of people will use the tool to kind of show improvement year over year, so it can be really informational for a property manager to, like, let's say you were planning to do a whole slew of upgrades. Maybe you would set your baseline year as the year before you did those changes, and then you can kind of see over time how you're improving. That's strictly kind of for your own information, though, and is not a part of the LEED benchmarking. So for LEED's sake, you just need to know what your current score is for the performance period year.
Okay. Tell me about the phase-out period for a LEED EBOM project. Is it 5 years?
Sure. So LEED EBOM does offer the opportunity for recertification, and kind of the idea out there now is that your certification would be good for up to 5 years, and you can recertify every year if you really like to, or at any interval kind of between 1 and 5 years. After the 5th year, you kind of be starting from square one in terms of your strategy and your performance period and so on. So it's not, the idea of recertification and how it actually works in practice is definitely something that's still evolving. And so if you're kind of considering it or want to know more about it, I would certainly kind of keep dialed into how USGBC is moving on that front, because I'm sure there'll be more kind of robust framework and information around that at some point in the future.
Okay, Jenny. Another question. If a project has to repeat part of the performance period because of a certain credit being marked pending, what impact does that have on the requirement for the performance periods for all credits and prerequisites to end within a certain time frame?
Sure. Yeah, it gets a little kind of temporally complicated. What will sometimes happen is, maybe there's, for certain kinds of credits, if you messed up, you'll be sort of allowed to make a correction. And it doesn't apply to all credits. An example would be, let's say you did a waste audit and you didn't do it properly. You'll be generally allowed to repeat the waste audit, and obviously you'd now be falling outside of your performance period with that audit, and that's okay. You don't have to kind of update the tracking for all of the other credits and so on. You're just kind of allowed to repeat the audit outside of the performance period. For other credits that are much more performance period dependent, like, say you're pursuing one of the purchasing credits and you wanted to include the last 2 months of data after the preliminary review, then it's less clear cut. You may not be allowed to extend and include more data for those kinds of credits.
Okay. Jenny, how difficult is it to achieve IEQ prerequisite 2 for building in an urban area with no setback? Is signage at entrances enough?
Okay, so this is a prerequisite that prohibits smoking or seeks to control environmental tobacco smoke control. And you do sometimes see the rules for the exterior are no smoking within 25 feet of doorways or operable windows or intakes and so on. In an urban area with no setbacks, the strategy typically would be to just sort of post signs, at the door or wherever saying, no smoking within 25 feet. The signage is okay. You don't have to have a special designated area or anything like that. You can just prohibit it around your doorways.
Okay, thank you. Jenny, is there guidance about how to accomplish energy benchmarking for mixed-use projects, i.e. those that fit into both Case 1 and Case 2 due to the inclusion of both multifamily and hotel or office uses?
Ooh, that sounds like a complicated one. I would recommend that sort of situation is usually dictated by Energy Star's rules. They will allow, like let's say you had a K-12 school with a laboratory attached for some reason. So K-12 is definitely a space type they rate. A laboratory is not. Usually their rule is that if the non-rateable space type is 10% or less of the floor area, you can still rate the whole building through their program. If it was half K-12 school and half semiconductor laboratory, you would have to use the Case 2 calculator. So you don't really try to kind of pair the two strategies. You either fall within one bucket or the other depending on the breakdown in space types in your building. There's what's called the Professional Engineer's Guide to Energy Star, I think is the name of it. Is a document that the EPA puts out that really gives you, it's kind of like the reference guide for Energy Star, and they provide a lot of information about the benchmarking rules and when a building is or isn't eligible. So I'd recommend kind of taking a look at that thing. The Case 2 calculator also kind of the front page of it, the front tab of it I should say, sort of walks you through eligibility to help you know if you're qualifying for that case or not. And really it's going to come down to the square footage percentage of each of those space types as to which way it goes.
Okay, thank you. We have time for a couple more questions. I'm going to just pause here and say that there are a lot of good questions coming in. If your question doesn't get answered in today's webinar, I recommend that you go to leaduser.com and use the forum there to pose your question to our lead user community, and you should find you can get good help there on the lead user forum. It's again at leaduser.com. So Jenny, what about restaurants? Where do they fit into Case 1 or Case 2?
I am not sure about that one. I think that would be one to, I think restaurants may be rateable by Energy Star, but I'm not sure. So you definitely want to look that up on Energy Star's website. Okay.
Can you share any tips or good examples of how you communicated in multi-tenant situations with EBOM?
Sure. A lot of times there'll be, in a multi-tenant building, there'll be a tenant coordinator who is sort of responsible for kind of interacting with different key contacts for each of the tenants. So we try to, on our projects, we'll use those existing lines of communications to sort of start conversations around a lead process or project. And it really sort of like if you invite tenants in early and also help them, have them help you shape the strategy, there's really a lot that can benefit for the overall goals of the project. There's also, I think, tenants are tricky because sometimes the incentives or the rewards are a little bit misaligned. Like maybe it's difficult to get your tenants to save energy because you have arrangements with them that mean you get all of that savings, even though it's their good behavior. So trying to figure out where you can kind of push some of the reward back into their court if there's not already a structure for doing that is a good idea. Or people, really like competing with each other in contests. So this isn't limited to multi-tenant buildings, but if you start being transparent about information, you will see good behavior as an outcome. We had this example of a building where they had floor-by-floor electricity metering, and they just started telling the floors, what place they were in, and that spurred sort of this natural contest. So depending on your situation, some of those strategies may or may not be appropriate. You have to kind of know the culture of your building and your tenants, but there's lots you can do to kind of get incentives and rewards sort of funneling back to them to sort of help with their engagement.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Jenny, the question is, there's a LEED EBOM project in Colombia, South America. We're currently in feasibility phase. Basically, the question is, will we be able to benchmark energy use using Energy Star for EAP2?
Sure, this is a good question, and I'm glad it came up. International buildings are not eligible for an official Energy Star label, but they can be rated. You can get a score for them as long as they're a rateable space type. So if this building in Colombia is an office building, that's a rateable space type. So you absolutely would use Case 1 through Energy Star to get your score. And there are a lot of international cities listed. One of the first things you have to do is tell Energy Star where your project is. And it includes, in the U.S., like every place under the sun, but internationally it includes a lot of cities internationally per country. So you would usually, if your particular city isn't listed, you would choose the one that is most climatically similar to you from your country.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to tell us what your favorite LEED EBOM credit is to work on and what your favorite tip is for that. At the moment, I'm just going to say, though, that that's all the time we have for questions today. If you have additional questions that didn't get answered during this webinar, I'd strongly encourage you to use the LEED user forum to get those questions answered. Today's free webinar was hosted by LEED User, a membership website with credit-by-credit guidance for LEED EBOM and other LEED projects. I'm also going to put in a little plug here for the U.S. Green Building Council and its LEED EBOM educational services, except the slide that I wanted to come up isn't coming up. So I'm sorry about that, but please, I encourage you to check out the USGBC for their educational offerings on LEED EBOM. They have a lot of great things. They asked me to put in a mention here, and so I'm doing that. Back to you, Jenny. What's your favorite credit to work on and your favorite tip for earning that credit?
It's hard. Superlatives are hard for me, but I do love me a waste audit. I've got to say, they are fascinating, dirty but fascinating. We've done a number of them on our projects, and we find all kinds of things like cash money and ladies' high heels in the recycling and beer bottles. It's really interesting to see what your people are throwing out.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. You've been hearing a webinar from Jenny Carney, a consultant with YRG Sustainability. My name is Tristan Roberts. I'm with LEED User. And that concludes today's presentation. Thank you for joining us.
All right. Thanks, Tristan.